We are on the lunch break in the second day of questioning of the undercover police officer HN118, who, using the cover name Simon Wellings, infiltrated globalized resistance and put himself in a position to be able to report on dissent. I am joined with hardened anarchist Emily Apple, who we heard a lot about today, and also off camera Lisa, who is one of Police Spies Out of Lives. Say hello.
Hi, hello. I've finally made it after trying to listen from home and not managing very well.
We've seen a whole bunch of HN118's reporting. I say reporting because a lot of the time it's just copy and paste of stuff that was publicly available. Yep. We had a whole section about the forward intelligence teams, which, for those who are not familiar, were not part of the special branch. They were another part of policing. They were from public order, and they essentially went around, harassed activists, followed them around, and if there was one activist that they seemed to hate more than anybody else, it was Emily. It appeared that some of HN118's reporting, I use inverted commas for that every time, related to information that would be useful to the forward intelligence teams, and there was a bunch of questions asked around the way they targeted you. What did you make of what was said?
I was quite gobsmacked, actually. Like, just in terms of some of the omissions that we got around the use of fit teams, and the fact that he admitted that there could be a chilling effect, that he talked about occasions where he'd seen me being really closely followed by fit, because I think it's something to sort of, when we talk about this, we sort of sometimes think about, oh, there were just some cops following. But, I remember protests when they were like literally kind of on my shoulder, like it was impossible to walk with my friends and stuff like that because they were so sort of close next to me.
Yeah, he said they were stuck to you like glue. Yeah, he was, he didn't sort of roll back on any of that. He said they were, and also he did say that they were used the fit team to disrupt. So, and that chimes with your memories, obviously.
No, absolutely. They were a huge disruptive force. I mean,
it was for hours on end.
That was
nothing.
Hours and hours on end. It was like from the start of a demo. It was after we went to the pub. I spoke to an old non-political friend of mine recently, and we were just talking about those days. And she was saying, like, she remembers sort of like meeting me after demos and then being followed by Fit because she was with me, and just like how weird that was. And yeah, their entire purpose was to harass and to disrupt and to put a stop to political movements in the same way that the SDS was. It was the overt version of the covert policing. But the fact, he also admitted that that it was likely that there was a correlation between SDS reporting and how people were being targeted, which I think I've commented on before, and I've commented on in stuff relation to the inquiry, that the intensity of the harassment I got from the fit teams like stepped up when I started to get to know HN3 Jason Bishop, and that's when the sort of real overt personal targeting started.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of because someone is well traced, then they become well traced more. And like he kind of admitted that, he hoped that there would be checks and balances in place that would the higher up that would prevent, would make sure that it was correct targeting.
It was out, and he did this a few times of kind of saying, oh, well, I hope this would have been checked by the office, or I'm sure it was for like this real kind of benevolent purpose. It wasn't actually for like disrupting these movements or having this impact. And it was just reams of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most offensive things I think he said was when he was talking about the reporting that he was doing on the Jean-Charles de Mendes family justice campaign, and he said he hoped that his reports were being used to make sure that any policing was respectful and appropriate to something which was clearly deeply sensitive.
Yeah, I hope what some of those comments, those type of comments, really tell us is that actually the copper on the ground is just being asked to do stuff and doing it, and is above that officer. The people actually asking for the information, doing stuff with the information, are they're the real people that really need holding to account.
What I thought was the most absolutely fucking hilarious part of the questioning of HN118 was the Patrick McCurdy interviews. The fact that whilst deployed, he befriended someone who was doing a PhD, and then sat down for at least 3 recorded interviews with Patrick McCurdy, where he spoke at length about his views on protest, on policing, all sorts of things. I mean, it was kind of put to him that isn't it kind of a bit inappropriate for an undercover police officer to be doing this, to be giving his, and he was, it didn't occur to me at the time.
Oh no, nothing occurred to him at the time. He existed in some weird vacuum where nothing seemed to occur to him at the time. But yeah, utterly inappropriate. And then he was asked whether he was answering these questions genuinely or as his persona, and he was just like, "Oh no, it was my persona." And yeah, just unbelievable that he ever thought that was an all right thing to do, and also very, very fluffy around whether his managers had any knowledge of this whatsoever, because it didn't seem that they did, or it hasn't come up anywhere.
I mean, what was also noticeable was that he was shown one report that he gave in a proper report he gave of a protest in Derby, and then the very long version of a much more detailed version that he gave to Patrick McCurdy in the interview, which I mean also seemed much more factual, much more detailed, much more sensible.
Yeah, and then he said something like, now that I'm thinking about it, now that you're asking me about this, I'm suddenly remembering, as if it hadn't occurred to him to think about this in advance. I'm just now suddenly remembering that he sort of implied that he'd been being badgered by Patrick to be involved, and that he'd put him off a couple of times and then eventually had to relent. But that doesn't quite ring true if he gave 3 separate recorded. If he was just doing it to fob him off, he would have been, he would have been maybe a bit shorter or a bit, he was obviously, loving it.
I mean, it was quite interesting. He said that Patrick McCurdy was the person he got closest to during the second part of his deployment after he'd been exposed by globalized resistance. And he said, "So how close did you get?" "Oh, not very close at all, really. But that was the closest I got." And we're really seeing this. I mean, as he said himself, this putting himself in a position to report. And we've seen these logs of how he spent his day, because towards the end the SDS had to account for their time much more, and it really is him sat in his bedroom going on Indie Media, going on the email list.
And then there was that line earlier today about how the higher ups didn't know where to look. Well, I mean, what were they doing? Weren't very difficult to log on to Indie Media or Evans 75 or join a few email lists. That's the pinnacle of police intelligence for their higher ups.
I would say, just to give people some context of those times, I mean, the internet wasn't quite as big, and in terms of activist internet, it was even smaller. It really was just 2 or 3 websites we're talking about. Social media hadn't really happened yet. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't lots of trawling that was required. I mean, it was literally a handful of websites and a few email lists.
Yeah, and I was one of the reasons I came down is because he's reported on so many events that I was at, it seems, but I have absolutely no memory of him. I just thought maybe, seeing his mannerisms or his facial expressions might jog a memory in it, and it really doesn't, because it appears that he wasn't really at those events. He was just, like I say, he was looking on the internet, he was doing all that, and in some ways I just thought, maybe that. In some ways, that's more effective for them if somebody's going really under the radar and they're quite anonymous. But, this guy, I don't know that he was this kind of anonymous figure just wandering about reporting on everyone. He really wasn't actually there most of the time. And what I've just heard today from one of the lawyers is that he was one of the most highly paid.
The highest paid.
The highest paid SDS officer ever, and this is the quality, this is what they were getting. It's I don't know, really don't know what to make of him at all.
I mean, a lot of what we've heard today has been in the backdrop of the fact the SDS was being wound up. He said after Mike Dell left in 2005, that the following sort of management can give the impression that at any moment, 10 days notice, the SDS could be wound up. And he said it really changed. One day you'd go in and everything was fine. The next day you'd go in and it's like, get ready to pull stakes at any moment. He claims that towards the end he was spending 2 or 3 days in the office attending meetings about the unit rather than in the field, and you're getting a real sense of the batshittery, as we've called it a few times, of the SDS was really kind of coming to the fore.
Yeah, it was kind of like all the cards started tumbling down of everything that they were doing. It's hard to say with Wellings how much of his representation of it is true, and I think one of the problems that we have with this period of the SDS and their management is we've got a load of lying bastards all lying about each other, and we're trying to like work out which bits of the grains of truth amongst a load of people that are lying. So it's quite hard to tell.
Yeah, and this guy is, you know, every time they bring something up about his reports, you know, or it wasn't really, you know, you weren't really there, or you weren't, you know, or the report says something about him being very close to someone. He's quite happily sitting there going like, oh no, I wasn't that close to him. Oh no, I didn't go. Oh no, this isn't true. So it's quite hard to work out, you know. Yeah, I mean, I guess that chimes with our memory that he wasn't at those events actually.
But I also wonder as well, because we all did this group statement that sort of went through all these groups that he said that he targeted, and we did this group statement saying, well, none of us remember him, and we had to put it together really at the last minute. And I wonder if we hadn't done that, whether he would have claimed to have been much more closely linked to all those groups if it wasn't for that weight of evidence of so many people coming forward going, no, he wasn't there. No, he wasn't really close to this. And I think maybe if it wasn't for that, because he is portrayed throughout as being this kind of like uber spy cop who like managed to do so much, you know, and he's like the exemplary one. He didn't have a relationship, you know, and he produced so much intelligence. Which is quite easy if you're just pulling stuff off the internet and cutting and pasting it into a report.
Yeah, I mean, we see from the authorizations that, you know, the long list of countries that he supposedly has full coverage of, I mean, including Australia, a country he never visited. He reported on one activist who returned to Australia, and that was enough for him to have coverage of the whole of the country. I mean, it's so over the top. He's asked, you know, why are there so many inaccuracies? Why is there so much exaggeration? Why do you think this is? And he goes, oh, well, I just can only assume that the authorities were written by somebody who wasn't familiar with my work at all, that these documents really are not worth the paper they're written on.
Yeah, and was it just the unit trying to justify its own existence at this point? And hopefully what the benefit in some ways of this situation is going to be is that it's going to expose the fact that basically the reports are a fiction a lot of the time. You know, if it's obviously not going to be just his reports that have been fictionalized.
There is there's a big area which I think we're all sat in the room waiting for them to get to, which it's been alluded to a couple of times, though, as I thought they were about to get into it, it went on another direction. But it was his knowledge and understanding of what the deployment of the National Public Order Intelligence Unit officers was. Obviously, he is in the same area as Mark Kennedy, Marco Jacobs, Lynn Watson, Rod Richardson. He's when he was taken earlier on, when he was taken through this document that claimed this access document, as it was called, claiming he had access to all these groups, he said, oh, you know, I was told not to concentrate too much on Cardiff Anarchist Network because that was covered. I was told not to concentrate too much on Circa because that was covered. Actually, just before we finished, there was a section of questions about his reporting on the Muslim community, and he offered to report on a South London mosque at one point, and he said the witness statement from his manager was he was told not to. That would be collateral intrusion. He said, oh no, I was told not to because it was already covered, that there was already reporting from that mosque taking place. But we really haven't had the questions yet of his knowledge of what the NPORU officers were doing. Now, yesterday morning, he was asked about the sexual relationships of other undercover officers, and he just name-checked two. That was James Thompson and John Dines, both SDS officers. And he was asked, was there any more knowledge you had? And he was like, let me have a think. No. Any undercovers? No. Now, that question was very pointed. It wasn't just SDS. It was all undercover officers. Will he be? We're waiting for him to be asked the pointed questions. Was he aware of Mark Kennedy, of Marco Jacobs being in sexual relationships whilst he was in the same groups at the same events as both of them? I think this is one of the key questions, really.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the reasons why I've come down is that they might get into that territory. Although I'm also imagining that they might not, because they are trying to say, oh, we'll deal with tranche 4 information when it comes to tranche 4, But what would they do? Would they call him back? It's like there's witnesses that they've got there, sat there, who've written, who are implicated in all of these things that they're going to just not ask about for another, year and a half. And then, by which point they're obviously not going to call him back. So, it'll be disappointing if they don't, but I'm also kind of braced for it.
I think that's realistic. I mean, it is incredibly frustrating the way in which they're demarcating these different tranches. That was never our understanding when they talked about doing a chronological.
And it makes no sense because we've got these overlapping officers from from such a huge amount of time. And for so many of us, and I keep making this point, we've had like half the reporting from one period of time, because like I've got reports from SDS officers, and I know there were MPIE officers there as well, and it makes no sense. I mean, I think they do have to at least touch on it in the reporting, because there's so much reporting that has similarities to MPOE reporting. He makes references to it, and I mean, yeah, I'm very prepared for them not to as well, but I think it would be utterly ridiculous if they didn't, because there are so many references to it in his reporting as well.
I mean, that doesn't mean that they won't take the utterly ridiculous route. This is the undercover policing inquiry.
All right.
I mean, and we see this like really blatantly when it comes to the England and Wales only nature of the inquiry. We've had repeated times the counsel to the inquiry, Don Ramble, has said, just in relation to England,
not even and Wales.
No, we're not even and Wales anymore, mate.
We'll forget about Cornwall.
We're not even and Wales anymore. But I mean, it's particularly pertinent when it came to things like the G8 that was in Scotland, and there was a question asked about the briefings he gave to Tayside Police about the G8 summit. He said, "Will these briefings take place in Scotland or in England?" And he was, "Oh, I did a great many briefings." And he wasn't sure where they were, so it was left alone, because it might have been in Scotland.
Yeah,
insane.
that was so insane, because it wasn't even like he testified that they all definitely took place in Scotland. It was just like, I don't know. Oh well, that's all right then. So I think the question he was also was like, so you can't give evidence about them taking place in England? And then he went, well, no, because he didn't remember, and he just said that. So yeah, that was ridiculous.
Well, he did refer to being in a indie media hub in Scotland, and he was allowed to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, he made loads of references actually to things that happened in Scotland. He talks about meeting Patrick McCurdy in Glasgow. It's a ridiculous sort of like marker whether things took place in Wales or not, and it's very frustrating.
Incredibly frustrating. I thought it was also really interesting, the questions, because he was trying to say, but I could provide information about all these like violent European anarchists and sort of stuff like that. And it was made sort of very clear of like, well, what was the policing purpose in you going on these trips for public order in London? And he really just fudged that entirely. He didn't have a decent answer for that at all.
It was that I think what he said was that it gave him the opportunity to assess the demeanor of activists that may come and protest in the UK at a later date. What on earth does that mean?
Yeah, and I'm still a bit confused about this. The fact that the SDS is a Met, unit, and yet, and they supposedly have to have all these authorizations to act anywhere outside of London. Yet, by the time we get to this era, so much is going on and is being reported on outside of London. I don't know. I guess. They're not even pretending to justify that it's about London, really.
It is really surreal. When it wasn't that long ago when we were looking at Mark Jenner's authorizations, and it was like these constant authorizations for him to go to a meeting in Sheffield or go anything outside London. There's this whole bunch of paperwork. We're seeing none of that at all for HN118.
No, and for so many of them from this era as well, there's just nothing. But then there is so much that's missing as well. I mean, probably not the things that they were supposed to have, because I suspect they just didn't have them. I think it's just the things that they didn't want us to see that are missing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 49 people watching. Only 4 of you have liked. Please like. It would make a huge impact on how widely these videos are seen. We've had some comments. One here from Proudhon. Thanks, Tom, Emily, and Lisa, and the rest of you wonderful, dangerous people. Ha ha ha! Love and solidarity. Thanks. Yeah. Sometimes I'd like to think that occasionally we can still be dangerous.
I mean, he wasn't actually asked to give a definition of what hardened means.
Yeah.
What a hardened anarchist actually means. He said, "I'm sure Emily wouldn't mind being called an anarchist."
Yeah.
But then that left it at that.
Yeah, definitely an anarchist.
No, are you hardened?
No, I'm very soft and squidgy. I'm old. And I think, I was hardened in the sense of facing that level of police violence and harassment all the time. But in terms of the way by them, but in terms of the way they're using it in their reports, they're using those kind of phrases as violent extremist, troublemaker, whatever. But but that word hardened is around violence. It's around that threat. It's a justification. It's not saying, oh, I've had to deal with a load of shit, because he actually admitted that he didn't even think about my mental health, even though he quotes from a proposal that I wrote for tackling the fit teams that talks about the mental health breakdown I had as a result of policing. And he got asked whether he gave any consideration to my mental health or was worried about me. He was like, nah, I didn't think about that. I was like, well, didn't think you would have done, mate, but good to hear it. But I'm now officially a soft and cuddly anarchist, I'd like to put on the record.
Just some other comments, some from Jack Shepherd, which is Chris Bryan. Patrick firmly denies there's any badgering involved in terms of getting 118 to do those interviews. He says it's good that HN118 agreed the fit had a chilling effect on protests, though. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was really, really important. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to say about that in terms of policing when this hearing's over, because like campaigning against that kind of harassment style policing has been like a really big part of my life for such a long time, and they're still doing it. Like people talk about it as it's a tactic from the past, but all these policing tactics are still being deployed today. And so to have those kind of admissions that yes, there's a chilling effect, yes, it's around disruption and stuff like that, are actually really sort of significant admissions in terms of how we think about policing and what we're doing about policing.
Yeah, and just the idea that a lot of the policing activity is not around finding intelligence. It's not around, it is about disrupting the groups, and that's been sort of touched on a bit about him maybe having the intention of disrupting globalized resistance. But I think we need to really bring that theme out, don't we?
Yeah, 100%. That's really key. More about the surprise that the line of questioning about the fit, great they did. Yeah, I think it's really important. I don't think we can really understand the effect of the spy cops without really understanding the overt policing that was taking place at that period, of which the fit was the type of the spear, but there was a lot of other things as well. And we've got another comment here from Dave Smith. Even hairy-ass building workers knew about Urban 75 and Schnews. If the cream of the UK's political police didn't know about it, I want my tax money back. Yeah, fair point.
Oh my God, I wish I could have spent all those years getting paid for all the time I spent reading bloody indie media and Urban 75. Could have retired.
The words gravy and train.
Yes, yeah. Another comment, one from Pat from Veggies. Did you say the bundle of documents related to today's hearing was only disclosed at very short notice? Yeah, last week. Despite the spy cops having over 10 years to hide them and the inquiry spending over £100 million on this level of incompetence, perhaps Wellings should share his wealth with you. Yes, I think that's so as well.
Yeah, I think it was the middle of last week, maybe Wednesday, that I realised that reference to my relationship with Mark Kennedy is in this bundle. It wasn't even disclosed to my lawyers any earlier than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ridiculous situation. There's no way to run an inquiry. Another comment just thanking us for the reporting. And then another one from Dave Smith. Are you hardened? Is this carry-on anarchism? Outrageous. Outrageous. I mean, yes, blatantly. There's only an afternoon left of the questioning of HN118 Simon Wellings. It's an incredibly short amount of time for someone who had such a long deployment to be questioned for at the inquiry. Really shows the way that the inquiry's way of prioritizing the importance of questioning of officers. There's a lot. We've talked already about we really want them to get to the questions about the NPORU and his overlap with that. Is there anything else you'd really be looking out for him to talk about?
Well, I think the NPOU stuff is the most important stuff that I want to hear about. I'd like to hear about, especially in these last days of the internet, how much overtime he was getting. I would like to sort of put some figures on that.
A bit of a justification for the high wage, the overtime, the of what he really thought his role was for at this time.
I mean, interestingly, we've heard from a number of undercover officers that say essentially when it came to overtime, as far as they were concerned, there wasn't enough overtime for the amount of hours you were putting in. So everybody automatically had the maximum amount of overtime. They didn't justify it. They were just like, well, it's the maximum amount every week, no matter what. Which when you consider that he wasn't really involving himself in everybody's lives, particularly for the majority of his deployment, is quite a good earner.
Yeah, it's really weird. I just have such mixed feelings hearing about it as well, because obviously, it's much better that he wasn't deeply involved in anyone's lives. You know, I think obviously that's a good thing, but you know, on the other hand, the fact that he's being prized so highly, he's being paid so highly, and he's producing such bullshit. It's just, you know, it's a really weird scenario and a real weird mix of emotions about him and his deployment. You know, I still don't feel like we've had much depth off him. You know, he's admitting that various things were bullshit, but you know, maybe just a little bit more soul searching would be good to hear this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, we had that moment yesterday where he broke down crying, where he talked about how lying to everybody chips off your soul in the way that you never get back. I didn't believe a word of it personally. I don't think we're going to get much in terms of his soul searching from him.
Oh, can we get some more tears though?
Yeah, that would be good. We've got some more comments. One from someone from the campaign opposing police surveillance. The Kings North Climate Camp in 2007 had uniformed cops in riot gear surrounding the site at 5 a.m. Wait half an hour until everyone was out of bed, braced for an attack, then fucked off. Pure disruption. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe just him talking a bit more about that disruption as a role.
And also what he was disrupting and what they thought they were achieving with disrupting, given that, you know, like so many of them are saying, oh, well, these groups weren't actually a threat. So what were they disrupting and why were they disrupting? And, you know, how is that, can that ever be justified? And even at the time, like, it's all very well saying, oh, well, in retrospect, but surely you must have thought about some of this stuff at the time and the groups that you were disrupting and trying to break and reporting on and the impact of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another comment here from Pat from Veggies. Dear Undercover Policing Inquiry, watch and learn how a participant, Lisa, can be off screen while everything else is shown to the public. Yeah, I mean, this is a really key thing about the way in which the inquiry is dealing with the audio only broadcast today. And because we're not allowed to see the face of HN118, we just get like a blank screen, just the audio. But it's really frustrating when there's a reference to documents, which if you're in the room, you can see on the screens. Means you don't get to see the.
That's why I've come down, really, because I tried following it yesterday and I couldn't see what they were talking about most of the time.
It would be perfectly possible for the camera people just to not point it at the witness, to point it at the chair, to point it at the counsel of the inquiry, to show the documents.
So when you're in the room, there is one screen that is mostly just showing the documents at big, and they could, you know, they could keep that. It seems like they've got the technology and the ability.
Yeah, so please, I mean, like, I don't expect the tech team at the inquiries to be watching these videos. I know that many of the solicitors too, but yeah, you know, please take that on board. It would be very possible to have perhaps for tranche 4, we could have a much better approach to the audio only, or maybe actually, like, let's not have these limited fucking demands. Show their fucking faces. It's an absolute disgrace that HN118 has got out of this. You know,
there is no excuses whatsoever. These people infiltrated our lives. They fucked over our movements. They don't even have justifications for it. And people don't get to see their faces. I'm so glad that I'm here so I can see his face. I'm so angry still that I didn't get to see Bishop's face. And yeah, there are no excuses.
And with this guy as well, with Wellings, they're saying his deployment was unremarkable. Well, if it's that unremarkable, show his fucking face.
Yeah, and name him. But, you know, we know his first name's almost certainly Simon because it always was, but Wellings is a pseudonym. You know, name him properly. It's farce. We've nearly done half an hour. It would be nice to get our lunch. Thanks for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Please do like, share, and subscribe. All that stuff. It has a big impact on how many people see these videos. We've got half a day of HN118 still to go. Do another video during the afternoon break, and at the end of the day, please join us for that. We'll see you all in a bit. Bye for now.